552,820. That is the estimated number of homeless people in America in 2021. This, of course, being under the pretense that that number is very likely an underreport due to the difficulty in trying to record the homeless. If you are a frequent guest here, you'll know this is not the first time the topic of the homeless has come up. It was touched briefly with the Proud Family's Kwanzaa episode, and last year I mentioned Static Shock's holiday special with the character Maureen, i.e. Permafrost. A character who stands in contrast to Virgil's typical antagonist fare by the fact that she's just a homeless child who happens to also have superpowers. That episode was from the mid-2000s, and let's be honest, the situation hasn't gotten a heck of a lot better. I blame the fact that nobody's 100% positive on what to do about it. Now, let's not get it twisted. There are a lot of good ideas out there, like shelters where they can go and get a warm meal and a bed, but those places often have policies where you can't stay there all day, and if you're not back by a certain time, you will lose your bed. There's also some degree of trust in that regard, and some homeless people don't really want to risk their stuff getting stolen. Something other people have done, for example, is Santa Monica, a city in California. Santa Monica, and by extension California, is well known for being incredibly cool to the homeless. The problem with that is when there's a place that treats the homeless really well, and also has that balmy California weather, you end up with an area that looks absolutely terrible. Which, of course, de-incentivizes people to go anywhere near there. A dimension of the situation is not every homeless person is alike. They are not a monolith. Some homeless people are probably some of the nicest people you will ever meet, while like one or two would probably stab you over a Cheez-It. Some are old and lost their homes. Others are young runaways who ran away from home for any number of reasons, be it having been disowned due to sexuality or attempting to escape an abusive situation. But to get back to the point, ironically the best solution to fixing the problem is the most obvious. Give them a house. Now, not like a big one, just like a weatherproof shed. As long as they have somewhere to hang their hat, they aren't technically homeless anymore. This is of course coming with the caveat that these areas where these small houses are placed are monitored heavily due to trying to minimize issues with the inhabitants doing things they aren't supposed to do. But I mean, as long as you've got houses for these people, you've technically solved the problem. Now, solving why they were homeless, that's the tricky part. But consider this. When we think about the homeless, we often only think about North American homelessness. But people being homeless is not an American problem. It's something that happens all around the world. And in this case, Japan. Over there, the situation has some key cultural differences. For one thing, Japan's homeless problem started in earnest after World War II, with its peak in the 90s. See, while stateside America was getting hooked on Nirvana and Seinfeld, Japan spent the 90s going through the lost decade, a period in which Japan's meteoric rise in economic prosperity from the 80s fell. This is primarily due to the Bank of Japan trying to cool off the housing market by increasing interest rate. There's also a key difference in how the homeless get by in Japan. You see, in America, panhandling is protected by the First Amendment, and in Canada, as long as you're not doing it aggressively, it isn't illegal either. In Japan, panhandling is illegal on the basis of it being viewed as obscenely rude. So what will often happen is what is called invisible begging. The homeless will often hide in cardboard box tents and do such things as pick up any loose change that gets dropped near them, or go out and do odd jobs like cleaning up bathrooms or picking up litter. As long as no one notices them, they can make money. This is why many will set up camps in parks away from prying eyes. So let's say it's December the 24th in early 2000s Japan, roughly 2003. It's been about 2 years since the end of the lost decade, and you're homeless and you go off to spend Christmas Eve scrounging through some garbage when you hear a really weird sound. This strange turn of events begins the story of Gin, the old drunk, Hana the widow, and Miyuki, the teenage runaway, and how one Christmas Eve they became embroiled in a story called... But let's rewind to see how we got here. We first meet Gin and Hana attending a Christmas pageant being put on by a church and then getting a meal, with Hana asking for another serving.
Is that all there is, sweetheart? Could you make mine a double? I am eating for two, you know. It's Christmas!
Now, she was actually asking for a portion to give to Miyuki, who's currently sitting on top of a building, spitting on people. The reason the soup lady was confused by her statement is that Hana is an unusual rarity in the primarily male homeless population of Japan. Doubly so given she's a trans woman.
Enjoy. I got more knocking around in my head than a homo with no balls.
No, sweetie. God gave me a pair of those by mistake.
The narrative is remarkably very neutral about it, considering the movie is from 2003. The only one who seems to have any issue with it is Gin, but they're still friends and Hana doesn't take any of his crap, so it's all very relative. Anyway, after getting Miyuki, they start rummaging through the garbage, and we're right back to where we started. So, for obvious reasons, the trio didn't like the idea of abandoning a baby, with Hana wanting to keep her under the pretense of the baby being a gift from God, naming her Kyoko, a name based on the Japanese name for the song Silent Night. After taking Kyoko back to their cardboard box house, which would probably cost $1,000 rent in New York.
Oh yeah, but it's all about location. Location.
Gin makes it fairly clear from the outset that it's just a plain bad idea to keep her, and when morning comes, they need to take her to the police. So while Miyuki goes out to buy water and supplies, Gin exposits that he used to be a cyclist who got banned due to betting on one of his own races, and had a wife and daughter. The operative word being used to.
My girl died shortly after that. My wife followed my daughter.
After getting supplies and going to sleep, at the butt crack of dawn, Miyuki notices Hana and Kyoko are gone, with her and Gin finding Hana by following her footprints. Apparently, in the interim, Hana, through a combination of not wanting Kyoko to grow up shuffled from foster home to foster home like herself, and wanting to ask Kyoko's parents why they abandoned her, she feels it's only right to bring Kyoko to her parents themselves instead of pawning her off on the police. With their only clue being the key to a transit locker that was with Kyoko, and it'll probably take days to find the right one, and they find it immediately. So they crack the locker open to find a bunch of loose crap, including a bundle of pictures of a couple they assume to be Kyoko's parents, and business cards for a host club. For obvious reasons, a club isn't going to be open to phone calls right now, so they have no choice but to go there. And as they leave, the funniest joke of the movie happens.
There was a miracle.
By now, you may have picked up on the slight three wise men angle the story seems to be following. This is actually because Tokyo Godfathers was inspired by the 1948 American movie Three Godfathers, a movie adaptation of a novel about three bank robbers who end up godfathers to a newborn, which itself took inspiration from the Three Wise Men story. Moving right along, getting on a pre-you-know-what cramped subway car to the club, the train is stopped because of heavy snowfall, and Miyuki starts panicking after seeing a guy in another subway car who recognizes her. And while she escapes out the window, the powdered milk she was holding onto for Kyoko cracks open, blowing away. So, with no choice, after trudging through the snow, they make a stop at a cemetery to do a little mild grave robbery towards offerings, looking for something to feed the baby, stumbling onto a grave with literally everything they need. Which insinuates that's a baby grave. Let's move on. But back to trudging through the snow, they find that some wise-ass parked his car in the middle of a communal street, and they find said wise-ass pinned under the car. Okay, you gotta hear this. After they rescue him, he explains.
Car got stuck, so I got out to take a look. Then I heard a whoops. That's when the damn car rolled on top of me.
That's very funny, right? Well, the chuckling stops when Gin realizes the guy's missing a pinky. You see, this gentleman is presumptively a member of a certain criminal organization endemic to the Pacific Rim, otherwise known as the reason why Japanese bathhouses ban people with tattoos.
The Japanese mafia?
Based on how he carries himself, he's probably an Oyabon, or boss. And coincidentally, he's from the area where the host club is. So they ask him about it, and he reveals that the owner of the club they were headed to is marrying his daughter today. Like, right now today. He was on his way to the ceremony before he stopped. So as a thank you, he lets them tag along to the wedding, and he introduces them to his daughter,
Kyoko!
Hello?
At the party, the groom makes his appearance, and he explains the lady in the photo's name is Sachiko. She left her job after getting pregnant. But, for some reason, the appearance of this guy is irritating Gin. Because as it turns out, he was the guy who convinced Gin to make the bet that ruined his life. Before Gin can break a bottle of wine over his head, there's a bit of a swing out of left field. The assailant, who's named Mario by the way, takes Miyuki and baby Kyoko hostage and forces them into a taxi to his place, with Miyuki having zero clue to what he or his wife are saying due to them not speaking Japanese. Think about it. Hana, of course, goes full surrogate mama bear and tries to track them down, with Gin deciding he'd rather grump his way through the rest of the movie, crossing paths with an even older homeless guy. In the process, getting a bag of that guy's stuff, and encountering advocates for one of the more terrible answers to what to do about the homeless.
All right, let's ring in the new year by taking out the trash.
Gentlemen, please, leave it to professionals. This entire sequence could be interpreted as a corruption of the Japanese concept of osoji, an end-of-the-year cleaning ritual designed to give your home a clean slate. In this case, they're cleaning out what they consider trash. Following said assault, Gin tries to re-find the girls, only managing to successfully collapse in an alley, only to be approached by what appears to be an angel. Meanwhile, Miyuki actually has managed to bond with Mario's wife despite the language barrier, in the process revealing details about her family, like how religious her mom is.
All she does is, oh Lord, Jesus, please, oh God, Lord, Jesus, Lord, God.
It's also explained that the guy she was terrified of earlier was her father, who she had stabbed over a tense situation involving her cat, that being her motivation for running away. Hana, after tracking down info from the cab driver, finds Miyuki and Kyoko and takes them the only place she can think of that's close by, the Angel Tower, a drag club near the Tokyo Tower where she used to work. And the owner is kinda sorta her adopted mother. Also, that angel from earlier works there, so Gein's there being nursed back to health by drag queens. While everyone is recuperating, it's revealed that the reason Hana is homeless, which I alluded to, is due to her husband Ken dying. Gladly not of something horrific he could pass on like AIDS, but of the ultra-mundane tripping on the soap in the bathroom. Oh, you mean like this? And Hana didn't really think she'd have been welcomed back due to the incident where she kicked a client, but in her defense, he's the one who called her a fairy. So, having found a place to spend the night, they hunker down till morning. The next day, the trio, now reunited, set off to spend several days headed towards where they think Sachiko and her husband's house is. Eventually night falls once again, and they take a break inside a construction site, discovering it's right next to the house. Siz's destroyed remains.
I'm home.
So the next morning, a couple of local busybody ladies explain that about 3 months ago, they left the house behind to get condemned. Presumably due to being waist-deep in debt on account of the husband's gambling. They also find what they think is their new address. Heading over there, they stop at a convenience store. I'd like to take a moment now to address the thought that you might be having about the number of coincidences they seem to be getting handed to them. From a storytelling perspective, typically you want to avoid having too many things just happen because, but the assertion is that God is aiding them in their quest to reunite Kyoko with her parents. This fact is given more evidence when you consider that right after they find Kyoko, Hana just barely avoids getting hit by a motorcycle. I'm telling you this now, because after stepping out of the store for 1 second after being in there for probably a good long while, this happens.
Call an ambulance, quickly.
Why? So can crash into you? Right at that moment, Hana collapses and they have to take her to a hospital. And I personally feel that this situation could best be described as...
Now that is irony!
And then things get awkward at the hospital when the nurse recognizes Gein. See, her name is also Kyoko and...
Dad?
So Gein's story was a complete lie. Both his wife and daughter are alive. The only truth to his story is the betting part. Gein wasn't even a cyclist. He owned a bike shop. Also, his daughter is getting married. To a doctor. Specifically the one who treated Hana.
That's great. Oh, isn't he my age? Isn't that too old?
The story gets even weirder, though, when it's revealed that Gein, by sheer accident, ripped off his new son-in-law's life story, after nurse Kyoko explains that he'd lost his wife and child. Hana, not amused by this turn of events, thoroughly sick of Gein, she takes off with Miyuki and baby Kyoko, to of course resume their search. But this time, she's going to do what she should have done, go to the police. And it's probably for the best, and hey, wait a second, ladies, you might want to turn around.
Hey, no! Wait! No, stop!
Turns out the lady they just stopped from jumping is Sachiko, and she's...
What were you thinking, abandoning your baby like that?
You know what? I think she earned that one. So, thinking they've accomplished what they set out to do, they return Kyoko to Sachiko, content in knowing they returned her to her mother. There's just one eensy-weensy little problem. After they left the hospital, Gein sees a very unusual news report.
Police have released a sketch of an infant taken from a hospital in Tokyo's Shinagawa ward. If you have seen this child, please contact authorities immediately.
Thoroughly confused, Gein goes to the address they found earlier that day and finds Sachiko's husband, who explains that Sachiko was pregnant, but it ended up being stillborn. So, overcome with grief, she took a baby from the hospital's maternity ward.
Damn it! Fake! She's a fake! Sachiko's not the real mother!
For pretty self-explanatory reasons, leaving a newborn in the care of a deranged crazy person is a problem they would very much like to rectify. After refinding the both of them, Sachiko flees and steals a delivery truck and drives off, with Gein in pursuit on bike, and the girl is flagging down that taxi from earlier. Yeah, like I said, coincidences. Sachiko almost shakes Gin off by crushing the bike, but it's not quite enough to stop our old booze bag. The chase climaxes with the truck going through the lobby of a building, and Sachiko taking the elevator to the roof, with the taxi driving through the opening into the building to follow her, with Miyuki chasing her by way of the staircase, with Gin and Hana not too far behind. And since somebody just drove a truck through a building, the police have surrounded the building, including a news helicopter. After Miyuki catches up to Sachiko, she claims the reason she did all this is that when she got pregnant, she was hoping that having a baby would solve all her problems with her husband. Yeah, because the surefire way to fix a relationship is to drag a child into it. So, when she lost hers, she felt the only way to remedy her crummy situation was to permanently borrow another. Due to that Herculean leap in logic, Miyuki calls her out. So, Sachiko tries to jump, but Miyuki catches her, imploring her to think of Kyoko.
I want to go home.
I think she might be crazy. Sachiko ends up dropping Kyoko, leaving Hana to be the one to save her, so left dangling from a banner. It is at this point that Amaterasu, Shinto goddess of the sun, tells God to stay off her turf, and saves Hana and Kyoko herself. After all that craziness, the baby, formerly known as Kyoko, is reunited with her real parents. Hana's pretty mad that they put her in the men's ward with Gin. I'm choosing to chalk it up by needing them all to be in the same room for plot convenience. And before Gin realizes that bag he got from the old bum as a winning lotto ticket, the baby's parents head over to ask them if they'll be her godparents, accompanied by a police inspector, Miyuki's dad.
Papa?